Today, Tracy and I are going to talk about driving innovation with personalized learning. My name is Jessie Martin. I'm a senior manager of compliance education at DaVita, and I manage a team of instructional designers and communication folks to design compliance training for over 50,000 teammates at DaVita. And I also work really closely with Tracy and her team over at Principled Technologies. They are key partners for us in the compliance training that we're designing.
That's right. We've been fortunate enough to work with DaVita since 2014 on a number of different projects. PT designs and develops custom training solutions, so we also have teams of instructional designers, project managers, graphics, developers, etc. Today we're going to talk about a couple case studies that relate mostly to personalized learning. So when we say that, what is personalized learning? Well, we have learned that it is a very broad definition and has many different meanings to many different people. But if you think about personalized media, you think about like Facebook and how it's optimized based on our prior experience with the platform, things that we've done, our behaviors, or maybe our interests. So if we're on Amazon, it's going to recommend content for us or recommend purchases for us based on our past behaviors.
Yeah, so really tailoring that for each individual person or audience.
Right, and then the other thing too is because we have become so accustomed to that in our home lives as we're surfing the internet, learners are going to come to expect that in their work environment as well if they haven't already. So today we're going to show you a few different ways that are pretty simple out of the gate to get started with personalized learning if you're not already there. So personalized learning, as you see on the screen, really is about tailoring your learning solutions to the preferences and interests and experience levels of your audience.
Yeah, so thinking about all the different ways that you can provide learners with tailored experiences, you can adjust so many different things. You can adjust the pace of the learning depending on their level of expertise, how much review they need, how much detail. You can adjust your approach based on what you might know about their motivations going into it, or maybe have them indicate to you what their motivations are and adjust your approach accordingly. You can adjust the content. So we're going to see two case studies today where we use personalized learning.
Right.
And one of them is a project that we partnered on where we really adjusted the content in our compliance training to be relevant to folks in a number of different roles at DaVita. And then another case study where we adjusted, or really Principled Technologies adjusted the experience for the learner. So thinking about
different formats based on the learner and based on what was needed for the training at that time. So personalized learning, as we said, it's very broad, and it really, as you make those adjustments, you can make them along a technical complexity spectrum. So there are some things that you can do very simply on the left end of the spectrum, and that's where we're going to be mostly focusing today. But then also, as you think about those Amazon examples, they're using very complex artificial intelligence, machine learning to make those recommendations. Often learning organizations aren't quite there yet, but there are some platforms that are starting to get there, and we're going to show you one of those today.
So just starting with the question, what's so great about personalized learning? Yeah. So for instance, why use a personalized approach when a kind of one-size-fits-all approach might be more fast, cost-effective? And I think, our answer to that is really that a personalized approach can be just as fast and definitely maybe even more cost-effective at times, as long as you're using personalized learning to address a real need, or to overcome a challenge, to meet a business goal. Another thing about personalized learning, one of the favorite kind of most salient aspects of personalized learning that really sells it to me is that I think it's really creates opportunities to engage in some of those best practices in adult learning that we're also familiar with. Giving learners more control over their learning so that they feel like they're contributing to the learning process. Making content relevant to learners, when you're competing for their attention. And as Principled Technology says, win in the attention economy, right? How are you going to get their attention if the learning isn't relevant to them? And if you've got a diverse audience, it's hard to keep that training relevant without personalizing a little bit.
And if they're zoned out, you're not going to get effective learning transfer.
Yeah, exactly. And then just, also kind of the adult learning principle of like being able to empower our learners to use all of the expertise and the knowledge that they're walking into our learning experience with, and recognizing that that's diverse sometimes, that there are different levels of expertise and knowledge that your learners are walking into the experience with. And so how do you draw parallels to it, allow them to use what they already know and build onto that without personalizing. And so I think that personalizing really opens up a lot of those doors. Also, what courses to personalize? I think that to answer this question, what do we start with if we want to personalize? What course? Yeah, it's a common question. It's a good question, and I think that there's a precursor question behind that, which is, what obstacles are you facing in your training program where personalized learning might help you overcome those obstacles? And so starting with that question will really lead you to the answer of like, well, what courses do I personalize? Where might a one-size-fits-all option be falling short, maybe not be engaging your learners, not giving you the results and behavior or knowledge that you're aiming for? Because at the end of the day, we really all are kind of looking for the same thing here, right? We want to impact knowledge and behavior, have our learners apply those behaviors back on the job. So sometimes I think it's a little easier to imagine how you might do something like personalized learning if you hear a case study of how another team did it, how another group did it. And so I'm going to share with you what our challenge was at DaVita, working on compliance training, and how personalized learning really helped us overcome a lot of those challenges and why we did it. And really,
you had to make the decision on which course to start with.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. And you guys were great partners on that too. But yeah, so basically what our challenges were is we were starting out with, kind of your annual compliance training where we were having over 50,000 teammates take this training. And DaVita is a provider of dialysis services at its core part of its business. And so a lot of the examples and the scenarios in the course were really, geared towards targeting those folks working out there with our patients, right? Our patient care in the dialysis service part of the business, because that was really our, those are the majority of where majority of our teammates are in their work environment. But we also have some more ancillary businesses, which are called strategic business initiatives. There's about, I think at the time that we did this first, there was about 11 of them. And the day-to-day of those teammates was very, very different than the day-to-day of our teammates out there working in our dialysis centers with patient care. And so what we were hearing from our business leaders in those kind of strategic business initiatives was that sometimes the learners were tuning out of our compliance training because they were seeing these examples that didn't really speak to the kinds of risks and situations that they were facing in their own work environment, which was different. So, what we needed to do is make that course relevant to them, make that content relevant to them so that we could pay attention. But then also, we needed to address some business goals. There were risks in these business units that we did want to address. We did want these teammates to understand how this applied to them, how a law like the anti-kickback statute might apply to them in a different way than a teammate out there who is working with patients. And I'll also describe kind of one of the constraints that we were working within, which you guys have gotten so used to working with us in compliance at Principled Technologies. But so my team has the joy and the honor and the challenge of taking information about laws, complex kind of laws and policies, and then turning that into digestible, meaningful content that learners can understand. And in order to arrive at kind of that right description or summary of the law or of the policy, there's a lot of back and forth and negotiation and edits and reviews that happen between my team and our subject matter experts, in compliance, our attorneys, et cetera. And so there's so much work that goes into that, right?
Yeah.
Into that kind of that meaningful description of the law that doesn't oversimplify it, but still makes sense to a learner. And so when we were wondering, well, do we make 12 different courses for these 12 different business units? Immediately my mind went to, wow.
That's a lot of reviews.
Yes, and that's a lot of, and like, I don't want 12 different descriptions of the anti-kickback statute based on who, our subject matter experts are in that particular business unit. And so those were all of the challenges that we were facing that really led us to, well, why don't we take a personalized approach? Why don't we create a course that adjusts for, the role or the business unit of each learner?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where we landed. So this is actually a screen in the first version of this course, which was built in Articulate Storyline, built by Principled Technologies in Articulate Storyline. And in the course, learners they select their own business unit. So basically, once they select their business unit, they are then routed on the back end to a version of the course that is tailored to their work experiences, that addresses, that provides them examples of what the risks look like in their day-to-day in their business unit. And how did we get there? A really important step that we went through in the process that we went through is discerning between what should be our common content, so like that core content that all teammates see the same thing, versus our personalized content or our role-based content. So it was really important to us as we thought about it, we thought about like efficiency and effectiveness, to keep things in that core content that really could be the same for all teammates. So again, like just working with version control and need for reviews. What could be the same for every single teammate? And we landed on this really. First, the why. Like, why is compliance important to you? Why does it matter? We felt like that could be the same for everybody. Also, we worked with all of our stakeholders on the front end to get everyone to agree to the same kind of summary of laws so that we didn't have to do that 12 different descriptions of the anti-kickback statute. Also, our policies, a lot of our compliance policies really apply across the board to a number of different teammates, so we kept that the same. And then there were certain examples that could really resonate with everyone depending on their business unit more broadly. So we kept that in our core content. And so that circle, that common content, everyone got that same content. And then when we decided to personalize, we focused on examples, scenarios, practice activities, those learner interactions that really give you more bang for your buck. And then also, when we wanted to personalize, we did it in a way that focusing on examples and scenarios could really help make the learner draw those connections between the law or the policy in their day-to-day by providing relevant examples and scenarios, by making sure that we were describing a situation that they would actually face in their work life. Another way that we address relevance too, which I think is like really important to discuss here, is addressing a business need. So really our business need is to reduce risk, right? Even in these strategic business initiatives. And so what we did was we actually had our compliance investigations folks. We asked them, like, what kind of behaviors are you seeing, or what's coming up in investigations specific to each of these different business units? And how can we target those key behaviors with our examples and assessments and make sure that people understand that those are risk behaviors? We asked our regulators, what's coming down the pipeline? What's keeping you up at night? How might that play out in the day-to-day of teammates in these different roles? And then can we address those with examples and scenarios so that we can, A, help teammates understand how this applies to them, but also, that we can really hit those key kind of targets of like reducing or preventing risk behaviors that we were looking to make sure that we avoided.
All right, so once the common content was identified as well as the role-specific content, we started to build the course. So if you imagine you're a Storyline developer, this is what it looks like on the back end. Storyline is a rapid development tool, so we definitely pushed the limits of the tool itself. But we knew we wanted to use the tool. It's something you use a lot, and it works well within DaVita's learning management system. But there were a lot of variables at play. So the structure essentially was that the learners chose their role, as you saw on that previous screen. They get a little bit of welcome information, and then they are introduced to a law, for example. And then after that, there will be some screens that pertain particularly to them and their role. So this transition is seamless to the learner. They don't realize that it's necessarily making that jump, or which part is common content and which part is role-specific content. But it really gives the learner that opportunity to practice in those activities or those scenarios that they will be in on a day-to-day basis. So this is just the very top of that architecture. It goes way, way down in the course.
And so at the end of the day, we were able to use kind of simple tools, articulate storyline.
Most people have them.
Yeah. A standard learning management system, and a process in place, just a discerning process about core content versus which content was personalized, to come up with some pretty good results. We saw positive results in our survey responses. So in particular, our survey responses from those teammates who now for the first time had examples and scenarios that were really specific to their business unit, to like what their day-to-day looked like, to how they might actually encounter risk. And they indicated to us that the course helped them to understand how to be more compliant at DaVita, and that they were more likely to be able to be compliant after taking the course. We got some more informal feedback from various business groups saying, hey, I've really heard from my teams that the compliance training really helped them understand how compliance applies to them this year. And then DaVita actually engaged in a third-party independent evaluation of our compliance program. And part of that was a survey that was given to a bunch of teammates. And in that survey, all the questions around compliance training, DaVita scored higher than industry standards in those questions. So even by kind of independent external evaluations, the program was determined to be effective, which is great.
Yeah, and now you're going to be doing more of it based on those results. All right, so along the continuum of complexity or technological requirements, that was fairly low. And as Jesse mentioned, we use standard learning tools like Storyline and a standard learning management system. But we're going to show an example that is a little bit more complex in that it uses a platform that is designed for personalized learning. And it does require a bit more coding know-how, HTML coding know-how. So this was a different topic entirely from healthcare and compliance. This was a server technician training. So the client came to us at PT and said, here's your challenge. Take 4 hours of content, which at the time was in a user manual, very dense text only user manual, and create a digital version of this course that is personalized based on different roles and different experience levels. So we had very junior level technicians and very senior level professionals. They also had the requirement of presenting this content in multiple ways. So not only a digital version, they did want a mobile first version. So if a technician was on site and had this troubleshooting issue, they could in that moment pull up a piece of content and apply it there live. But also a typical desktop course. But also they were going to present this as an instructor-led option, again giving learners options for how they would want to take it. And so the content we put into a tool called Xyleme, which is Xyleme. And we break down the content into very bite-sized pieces, even as small as just a couple sentences, and then tag the content in the system based on learner role, based on the format that content is appropriate to. So we might not teach everything from the manual in the instructor-led version, which might be just a day or two, or even less. So we would tag based on the format and based on the learners. We also chose a variety of instructional formats so that it's not boring. It certainly was when it started. So we use, as you can imagine, because it's a lot of how-to, how to make repairs, how to install this server series. We used a lot of video. So we had over, I think, 36 different videos, very bite-sized, from as small as 10 seconds to as long as probably 45 or 60 seconds. So again, they were all showing maybe one or two steps or a few steps in the process of how to make a repair. Now, multiple of those videos might be strung together based on the format or based on what the learner has input, but they are individual instructional pieces. We also used practice activities. So it's one thing to see it in a video or to see a stepwise instruction list, but then we gave them activities where we would say, okay, you're in the scenario, you're at a client site, this is broken, what do you do? And so activities like dragging, this plug to that port and those types of things, and then seeing their results.
I love how you use kind of a plug and play approach to allow for that personalization, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the system automatically, when you go to export the course, you select what format you want to export it at, and it will automatically pull those chunks that relate to that. And the great benefit for the client of using this system was that if they needed to make updates, they could go into one place to make that update, and then it would filter out to all the different places automatically. So it's great for versioning.
Very cool. Yeah.
So here you can see where the system is allowing us to make those customizations, again, based on that metadata. So as we think about both of these projects, they were very different, but we had similar key takeaways. The first one being, our learners really have come to expect that level of personalization, and there are a wide variety of ways that we can get started to meet that expectation. So even just as simple as providing choices. So giving bite-sized pieces, as well as deep dive opportunities to learn a slice of content.
Also just starting small, again, providing options to the learner. Or even starting small when it comes to, your step towards personalized learning, where you're really starting with just the simple question of where can personalized learning really address a need, a gap that we have, a challenge or an opportunity that we want to meet.
Yeah, and I think what you saw with your results too is learners really appreciate the effort. It's worth it.
Also, just taking the time to practice discerning between making some decisions about what's that core content that should go to everybody versus where do I really need to personalize, and making that really intentional, I think is really key to making sure that it was worth the while, right, to personalize.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think when you are identifying that content, if you're writing it or presenting it in those microlearning chunks, attention is so limited, and so to be able to have a variety of formats and options, whether you're using a microlearning strategy to chunk content, as Jesse did within one course, or you have multiple, different options loaded within your management system that give the learner those choices. Microlearning is a great way to grab their attention and to personalize. All right, and then I think the last key point is microlearning strategies are helpful for a couple of reasons. Of course, for personalizing, because once you have that bite-sized content, you can assemble it in different ways that are meaningful to the audience, but also just to grab their attention. Our attention is so limited that if you provide options that are as short as 30 seconds to 3 minutes, if you're on a lunch break or a coffee break, you can grab a little bit of content. So I'm a big fan of microlearning as well as you, and I think that sort of summarizes it. So thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it.